What secrets could three desperate women fleeing the law bring to a man who has spent 10 years hiding from the world? Tell me in the comments from which country or city you're watching us. My name is Thomas Whitmore, and I've been running from ghosts for 10 years. Not the kind that rattle chains in the night, but the kind that whisper your failures in the silence of dawn and remind you of everything you've lost when you're trying to forget. It was October 1878 when my solitary world came crashing down around me, and three desperate women appeared on my porch like harbingers of change I never asked for. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, from the day I chose to disappear from the world of the living. 10 years ago, I was a different man. I had a wife named Ellen, a daughter named Lucy, and a thriving cattle ranch in Colorado. We were happy, or at least I thought we were. Ellen had a smile that could light up the darkest winter day, and Lucy was 6 years old, with pigtails and a laugh that sounded like silver bells. They were my entire world, my reason for breathing, my purpose for existing. Then came the influenza outbreak of 1868. It swept through our valley like a wildfire, taking the young and old without mercy. I watched helplessly as my beautiful Ellen grew pale and weak, her breathing becoming labored, her fever burning through the night. Lucy followed 3 days later, her small body unable to fight the disease that had already taken her mother. I buried them both on the hill behind our house, under the old oak tree where Lucy used to play. The preacher spoke words I couldn't hear, neighbors offered condolences I couldn't accept, and life continued around me while mine stopped completely. I sold everything, the ranch, the cattle, the house where we'd been happy. I couldn't bear to live surrounded by memories of what I'd lost. With the money, I bought a small piece of land in the Montana Territory, far from civilization, far from people who might ask questions or offer sympathy I didn't want. The homestead I found was rough and isolated, sitting in a valley surrounded by pine-covered hills. The previous owner had abandoned it after a harsh winter, leaving behind a sturdy log cabin, a small barn, and 40 acres of land that nobody else wanted. It was perfect for a man who wanted to disappear. For 10 years, I lived like a hermit. I raised a few head of cattle, grew vegetables in a small garden, and hunted for meat. I spoke to no one except the occasional traveling merchant who might pass through looking for supplies. I had no friends, no social obligations, no reason to pretend I was anything other than what I'd become, a broken man waiting to die. My days followed the same pattern. I woke before dawn, tended to my animals, worked the land, and went to bed when the sun set. I didn't read books because they reminded me of the stories I used to tell Lucy. I didn't play music because Ellen used to sing along. I didn't celebrate holidays because they were meant for families, and I no longer had one. The closest town was Timber Ridge, a small mining settlement about 20 miles south. I went there perhaps 3 times a year, only when I absolutely needed supplies I couldn't make or grow myself. The townspeople knew me as the quiet man from the mountains, the one who paid in cash and spoke in grunts. They'd stopped trying to include me in their community years ago. I'd convinced myself that this was how I wanted to live, alone, forgotten, waiting for time to heal wounds that seemed determined to stay fresh. I thought I'd found peace in my isolation, but I was wrong. I'd found numbness, which is a different thing entirely. The day everything changed started like any other. October had painted the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, and the morning air carried the sharp bite of approaching winter. I was splitting wood behind the cabin when I heard the distant rumble of thunder. Looking up, I saw dark clouds gathering over the western peaks, promising the kind of early snowstorm that could trap a man for days. I worked faster, wanting to get enough wood split and stacked before the weather turned. The wind picked up, whistling through the pines and sending leaves swirling around the cabin. By late afternoon, the first fat snowflakes began to fall, and I knew I was in for a long, cold night. I was carrying the last armload of wood to the porch when I saw them, 3 figures on horseback, struggling through the increasing snow. They were still a quarter-mile away, but I could tell they were having trouble. Their horses were moving slowly, and one of the riders was slumped forward in the saddle. My first instinct was to go inside and pretend I hadn't seen them. I'd spent 10 years avoiding human contact, and I wasn't about to change now. But as I watched, one of the horses stumbled, and the slumped rider nearly fell. Something in that moment of vulnerability touched a part of me I thought had died with my family. Against my better judgment, I set down the wood and walked out to meet them. As they drew closer, I could see that all 3 were women, and they were in bad shape. Their clothes were torn and dirty, their faces pale with exhaustion and cold. The one who'd been slumping was barely conscious, held in the saddle by her companions. "Mister," called the one who seemed to be leading, her voice hoarse with fatigue, "we need help. My friend is hurt bad, and we can't make it to town in this storm." I looked at them more closely. The leader was young, maybe 25, with dark hair plastered to her head by melting snow. She had the kind of face that might have been beautiful if it weren't drawn tight with worry and exhaustion. The second woman was younger, barely out of her teens, with blonde hair and blue eyes that reminded me painfully of Lucy. The third, the injured one, was older, with greying hair and a face that spoke of hard living. "What happened to her?" I asked, nodding toward the unconscious woman. "She took a bullet 3 days ago," the leader replied. "We got most of the bleeding stopped, but she's getting worse. Please, mister, we just need shelter until the storm passes." I should have said no. I should have pointed them toward town and wished them luck. But something in the younger woman's eyes, fear mixed with desperate hope, made me think of Lucy, and I found myself nodding. "Bring her inside," I said. "I'll take care of your horses." They dismounted carefully, supporting their injured companion between them. I led their horses to the barn, unsaddled them, and gave them hay and water. When I returned to the cabin, I found the 3 women standing uncertainly in my main room, dripping snow on the floor I'd swept that morning. "Put her on the bed," I said, pointing to the small bedroom off the main room. "I'll get some hot water and see what I can do for her wound." As they helped their friend to the bed, I noticed something else about these women. They carried themselves like people who were used to looking over their shoulders, and the leader had a gun belt strapped around her waist. The pieces fell into place with uncomfortable clarity. "You're running from the law," I said. It wasn't a question. The leader met my eyes steadily. "Yes, we are. If that's a problem, we can leave as soon as the storm passes." I looked at the injured woman, who was now lying unconscious on my bed, her breathing shallow and labored. "What did you do?" "We robbed a bank," the leader said simply. "Or rather, we tried to. Things went wrong, and Sarah took a bullet when we were getting away." I stared at her. In 10 years of isolation, I'd imagined many scenarios that might bring people to my door. Bank robbers had not been among them. "Are you going to turn us in?" asked the younger woman, her voice trembling. I considered the question. 3 women, 1 dying, stranded in my cabin by a blizzard. I could refuse to help and probably watch one of them die. I could try to take them to town and turn them over to the sheriff. Or I could do what every instinct I'd buried for 10 years was telling me to do. Help them. "I'm going to try to save your friend," I said finally. "Everything else can wait until morning." The leader nodded, and for the first time since they'd arrived, I saw something like relief in her eyes. "Thank you, mister. I'm Kate Sullivan, by the way. This is Becky Coleman, and that's Sarah Thompson." "Thomas Whitmore," I replied, already gathering supplies to clean and dress Sarah's wound. As I worked on Sarah's injury, Kate and Becky told me their story. They weren't hardened criminals, just desperate women who'd made a terrible mistake. Kate had been trying to save her family's farm from foreclosure. Becky was an orphan who'd been working in a saloon, trying to earn enough money to go west and start over. Sarah was a widow whose husband had died in a mine accident, leaving her with debts she couldn't pay. "We heard about this bank in Denver that was owned by the same company that was taking Kate's farm," Becky explained while I cleaned Sarah's wound. "We thought if we could just get enough money to pay the debts, We could start over somewhere else. But the sheriff was there, Kate added. Someone must have warned him. Sarah got hit when we were trying to get away, and we've been running ever since. I worked in silence, cleaning the wound and applying fresh bandages. The bullet had gone through Sarah's side, missing vital organs but causing significant blood loss. She had a fever, and I could see signs of infection setting in. She needs a doctor, I said finally. I've done what I can, but if that infection gets worse, we can't take her to town, Kate said firmly. They'll arrest us all. Then we'll have to hope she's stronger than she looks, I replied. As the night wore on, the storm intensified. Wind howled around the cabin, and snow piled against the windows. I made soup and coffee, and we took turns sitting with Sarah, monitoring her fever and trying to get her to drink small amounts of water. For the first time in 10 years, my cabin was filled with voices other than my own. Despite the circumstances, I found myself oddly comforted by the presence of others. Kate proved to be intelligent and resourceful, helping me care for Sarah with steady hands and a calm manner. Becky was quieter but observant, noticing things I missed and anticipating needs before I expressed them. "Why do you live all alone out here?" Becky asked during one of our vigils beside Sarah's bed. "I had my reasons," I replied, not wanting to share the story of my losses with strangers. "Bad reasons or sad reasons?" she persisted gently. I looked at her young face, so reminiscent of Lucy's, and felt something stir in my chest that I thought had died years ago. "Sad reasons," I admitted. Kate, who had been listening, nodded as if she understood. "We all have sad reasons for the choices we make. The trick is knowing when it's time to choose differently." As dawn approached, Sarah's fever began to break. Her breathing became easier, and she started to respond when we spoke to her. For the first time since they'd arrived, I began to think she might survive. "You saved her life," Kate said quietly as we watched Sarah sleep peacefully for the first time in days. "We saved her life," I corrected. "I couldn't have done it alone." The storm was beginning to clear, and I knew that soon we'd have to face the reality of what came next. These women were wanted by the law, and harboring them made me an accessory to their crimes. But as I looked at them, Kate's determined strength, Becky's quiet courage, and Sarah's peaceful face as she finally rested, I realized that for the first time in 10 years, I felt alive again. The sun was beginning to rise over the mountains, painting the snow-covered valley in shades of pink and gold. It was beautiful, but I'd stopped seeing beauty years ago. Now, with 3 strangers sleeping in my cabin, I found myself noticing it again. Whatever came next, I knew that my 10 years of isolation were over. The question was whether that was a blessing or a curse I'd brought upon myself. Chapter 2. The morning brought crystalline air and a silence so profound it seemed to press against the cabin walls. I stood at the window, watching the sunrise paint the snow-covered mountains in shades of rose and gold, and realized I was seeing beauty for the first time in a decade. Behind me, 3 women slept peacefully, and for the first time since Ellen and Lucy died, I wasn't alone. Sarah's fever had broken completely during the night, and she was sleeping naturally now, her breathing steady and strong. Kate and Becky had taken turns sitting with her, and I'd watched them care for their friend with a tenderness that reminded me of the bonds family should have. "She looks better," Kate said softly, appearing beside me at the window. "Much better. The fever breaking was a good sign. If we can keep the wound clean and get some food in her, she should recover." Kate nodded, but I could see worry lines around her eyes. "What happens now, Thomas? The storm's clearing, and soon people will be moving around again. Sheriffs, bounty hunters, federal marshals. It was the question I'd been avoiding all night. These women had committed a crime, and I was harboring them. In the eyes of the law, that made me a criminal too. But when I looked at Kate's face, drawn with exhaustion and worry, I found I didn't care about the law as much as I cared about what happened to them. "Tell me the truth about what happened in Denver," I said. "All of it." Kate was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the mountains. "We were desperate, Thomas. All 3 of us. Sarah's husband died in a mine collapse, and the company refused to pay compensation. She had debts from his medical bills, and they were going to take her house. And you? My father died last year and left the farm to me. But there were debts I didn't know about, and the bank that held the mortgage was owned by the same company that refused to pay Sarah's compensation. They were foreclosing on farms all over the county, buying them for pennies on the dollar. What about Becky? Kate glanced toward the bedroom where Becky was sleeping beside Sarah. Becky's story is harder. She was orphaned at 14 and had to work in a saloon to survive. The owner he wasn't a good man. She was trying to save enough money to get away from him, but he made sure she never earned enough to leave. The picture Kate painted was becoming clearer. 3 women, each trapped by circumstances beyond their control, each desperate enough to risk everything for a chance at freedom. So you decided to rob a bank? We decided to take back what was stolen from us, Kate corrected. The bank had foreclosed on dozens of farms, ruined hundreds of families. We weren't trying to get rich. We just wanted enough to pay our debts and start over somewhere else. But it went wrong. Someone tipped off the sheriff. We think it was the bank manager's wife. She'd seen us asking questions around town. When we walked into the bank, there were 2 deputies waiting for us. I could imagine the scene. 3 women, probably terrified, walking into what they thought was their salvation and finding it was a trap. What happened then? We tried to run, but they started shooting. Sarah got hit when we were getting to our horses. We managed to get away, but we've been running ever since. How long ago? 5 days. We've been sleeping in the open, trying to stay ahead of the posse we knew was following us. I walked to the stove and poured 2 cups of coffee, handing one to Kate. Are you sure you were followed? We saw their dust for 3 days. Lost them in the mountains yesterday, but they're still out there. As if summoned by her words, we heard the sound of horses approaching. Kate went rigid, her hand moving instinctively to her gun. Get the others up, I said quietly. But don't panic. Let me see who it is first. Through the window, I could see 2 riders approaching the cabin. They were still distant, but something about their purposeful movement told me they weren't casual travelers. It's law, Kate whispered, having looked over my shoulder. Maybe. Get Sarah up and ready to move if we have to, but stay calm. Let me handle this. Kate disappeared into the bedroom and I heard quiet voices as she woke the others. I checked my own rifle, making sure it was loaded, then stepped out onto the porch. The 2 riders were close enough now that I could see their faces. One was young, maybe 25, with a deputy's badge pinned to his coat. The other was older, with the weathered look of a man who'd spent years in the saddle, a federal marshal if I had to guess. Morning, I called out as they approached. Morning, the older man replied, touching his hat brim. I'm Deputy Marshal William Foster. This is Deputy Harrison from Timber Ridge. We're looking for 3 women who might have passed through this area. 3 women? I kept my voice neutral, curious but not concerned. Bank robbers, Deputy Harrison added. One of them was wounded. We've been tracking them for 5 days. Haven't seen anyone, I said. This storm would have made travel pretty difficult. Marshal Foster studied me carefully. You mind if we look around? Just to be sure they didn't try to take shelter here during the storm. I felt my pulse quicken, but I kept my expression calm. Don't mind at all, though I should warn you, I've been living alone out here for 10 years. I'm not much for company. 10 years alone. Deputy Harrison seemed surprised. That's a long time to be by yourself. I like the quiet, I replied. Marshal Foster dismounted and began walking around the cabin, looking for signs of additional horses or people. I followed him, trying to appear cooperative while my mind raced. The women's horses were in the barn, and their tracks would be visible in the snow if he looked carefully. This is a nice setup you have here, the marshal said conversationally. Must be hard work, maintaining all this by yourself. I keep busy. He stopped at the barn door. Mind if I take a look inside? My heart hammered against my ribs. Go ahead. Marshal Foster opened the barn door and looked inside. I held my breath, waiting for him to notice the 3 additional horses. But the barn was dark, and the animals were quiet. After a moment, he closed the door and nodded to me. "Looks like you're telling the truth about being alone," he said. "These bank robbers are dangerous women, Mr. Whitmore. Thomas Whitmore." "Well, Mr. Whitmore, if you see anything suspicious, you'll let us know. There's a $100 reward for information leading to their capture." "I'll keep that in mind." The two lawmen remounted their horses, but Marshal Foster paused before leaving. "You know, Mr. Whitmore, 10 years is a long time to be alone. A man can forget what it's like to be around people, start making poor decisions about who he trusts." There was something in his tone that made me think he suspected more than he was letting on. "I'll remember that, Marshal." "See that you do." They rode away, but I noticed that Marshal Foster looked back several times. I stood on the porch until they disappeared over the ridge, then went back inside. Kate was waiting for me in the main room, her gun in her hand. "How much did they suspect?" "Enough to make me nervous," I admitted. "They'll be back, probably with more men. We need to decide what we're going to do." "We need to leave," Kate said immediately. "We've put you in enough danger already. Sarah can't travel yet. She needs at least another day to recover from the fever. Then Becky and I will go, and you can tell them that you're caring for Sarah because she's sick. You found her collapsed in the snow and you're nursing her back to health." I looked at Kate, studying her face. She was willing to sacrifice herself to protect Sarah and keep me out of trouble. It was the kind of selfless courage that I'd thought died with my wife. "There's another option," I said slowly. "What?" "We could make it look like you were never here. Hide the evidence, get your horses out of the barn, and create a story that explains Sarah's presence." "You'd do that? Risk everything to help us?" I thought about the question. Would I risk everything to help 3 women I'd known for less than 24 hours? A day ago, the answer would have been no. But something had changed in me during the long night of caring for Sarah, watching Kate's quiet strength and Becky's gentle courage. "Yes," I said simply, "I would." Kate stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. "What do you need us to do?" We spent the next hour preparing. I moved their horses to a hidden canyon about a mile from the cabin, where they'd be out of sight, but still accessible if needed. Kate and Becky helped me create a believable story about finding Sarah collapsed in the snow during the storm. "If anyone asks," I explained, "Sarah is my cousin from Colorado. She was traveling to visit family in Canada when the storm caught her. Her horse bolted, and she nearly froze to death before I found her. And if they ask about her wound, she fell on a broken branch while trying to find shelter. I've been caring for her since the storm. It wasn't a perfect story, but it was believable enough to create doubt. And doubt might be all we needed." Sarah had woken up while we were planning, and though she was still weak, she was lucid and able to understand what was happening. "You don't have to do this," she told me. "We can find another way." "This is the way," I replied. "Besides, I could use the company. It's been quiet around here for 10 years. As the day wore on, we settled into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Kate helped me with the morning chores, showing a knowledge of farm work that spoke of her background. Becky proved to be an excellent cook, turning my simple ingredients into meals that reminded me of family dinners I'd forgotten. "You know," Becky said as we sat down to eat, "this feels like the first real home I've had since I was a child. Don't get too comfortable," Kate warned. "We can't stay here forever." "I know," Becky replied, "but it's nice to pretend, even for a little while." That evening, as we sat around the fire, Sarah asked me the question I'd been dreading. "What happened to your family, Thomas? Kate told me you've been alone for 10 years. I looked at the 3 women, all watching me with gentle curiosity, and realized I wanted to tell them. For the first time in a decade, I wanted to share the story of Ellen and Lucy. "I had a wife and daughter," I said quietly. "They died in the influenza outbreak of 1868. I came here to get away from the memories." "I'm sorry," Sarah said softly. "That must have been terrible." "It was, but you know what's strange? Having you here, caring for you, it's the first time I've felt useful in 10 years. "You saved my life," Sarah said. That's more than useful. You all saved something in me too, I admitted. I didn't realize how dead I'd become inside until you arrived. Kate reached over and squeezed my hand. Sometimes the people we need find us when we least expect it. At the time, as we prepared for bed, I realized that I was dreading the moment when these women would leave. They'd brought life back to my cabin, purpose back to my days, and something I'd thought was lost forever. The feeling of being needed. But I also knew that danger was coming. Marshal Foster hadn't believed my story completely, and he'd be back. When he returned, it would be with more men and more questions. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and I had to be ready to protect the 3 women who'd stumbled into my life and somehow made it worth living again. Chapter 3. The second day dawned grey and cold, with heavy clouds promising more snow. I woke before sunrise, as I had every day for 10 years, but this time I wasn't alone. The sound of quiet breathing from the bedroom, where Sarah continued to recover, and the sight of Kate and Becky sleeping peacefully by the fire filled me with a contentment I'd forgotten was possible. But contentment was a luxury I couldn't afford. Marshal Foster would return, and when he did, we needed to be ready. I was starting the morning fire when Kate stirred and sat up, immediately alert. Any sign of them? Not yet. But they'll be back today, I'm sure of it. Kate nodded and began folding the blankets she'd used. How's Sarah? Stronger. The fever's completely gone and the wound is healing well. She might be able to travel by tomorrow if we have to. We should leave today, Kate said firmly, before they come back. In this weather? Look outside, Kate. There's another storm coming. If you get caught in the open, you'll all freeze to death. She looked out the window at the threatening sky, then back at me. We can't keep putting you at risk. I'm already at risk. Has been since the moment I let you in. Now we see it through together. Becky woke up then, stretching and yawning. Morning, she said cheerfully, then noticed our serious expressions. What's wrong? We're expecting company, I said. The marshal who was here yesterday will probably be back today with more men. What do? We stick to the story. Sarah is my cousin from Colorado, traveling to Canada when the storm caught her. You two are neighbors from the next valley over, helping me care for her. And if they don't believe us, then we'll deal with that when it happens. I spent the morning preparing for the worst while hoping for the best. I cleaned my rifles and made sure they were loaded, checked that we had enough food and water for a siege, and reviewed our escape routes with the women. There's a back trail that leads up into the high country, I explained, showing them the route on a rough map I'd drawn. It's dangerous in winter, but if we have to run, it's our best chance. Sarah had joined us in the main room, still weak, but determined not to be a burden. I can ride, she insisted. If we have to go, I won't slow you down. We're not leaving unless we have no choice, I replied. This is a good, defensible position, and we have supplies. Sometimes the best strategy is to stay put and wait for trouble to move on. Around noon we heard horses approaching. This time there were more of them, at least 6 riders from the sound of it. Kate and Becky took positions at the windows, while Sarah settled into a chair by the fire, playing her part as the invalid cousin. Remember, I said quietly, we're just neighbors helping out a sick woman, nothing more. I opened the door before they could knock, trying to appear relaxed and unsurprised. Marshal Foster sat his horse in front of the others, and I recognized Deputy Harrison beside him. The other 4 men were strangers, but their badges and hard faces told me they were all lawmen. Morning, Marshal, I said. What brings you back so soon? Mr. Whitmore, Foster replied, not dismounting. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I have a few more questions. I'm happy to help however I can. I'd like to speak with you privately, if you don't mind. I felt my pulse quicken, but I kept my expression neutral. Of course. Would you like to come inside? I have coffee on. Foster dismounted and followed me into the cabin. I could feel his eyes taking in every detail. The women's clothes hanging by the fire, the extra dishes on the table, the general sense of occupancy that 3 additional people bring to a space. Afternoon, ladies. Foster said politely to Kate and Becky. "I'm Deputy Marshal Foster." "Good afternoon," Kate replied, her voice steady. "I'm Kate, and this is my sister Rebecca. We're from the next valley over." "And what brings you ladies out in this weather?" Becky stepped forward, her face showing exactly the right amount of concern. "Thomas's cousin Sarah took ill during the storm. We came to help care for her." Foster looked toward Sarah, who was doing an excellent job of appearing weak and feverish. "I'm sorry to hear that, Mom. What seems to be the trouble?" "She fell from her horse during the storm," I said, "hit a broken branch and took a nasty cut to her side. She's been fighting fever for 2 days." "A cut to her side!" Foster's voice was suddenly sharp. "May I see it?" My heart stopped. The wound was obviously from a bullet, not a fall. Any experienced man would know the difference immediately. "I don't think that's appropriate," Kate said firmly. "Sarah is a respectable woman. I'm a federal marshal, ma'am. I have the authority to examine evidence in a criminal investigation." "Evidence of what?" I asked, trying to sound confused rather than desperate. Foster ignored me and approached Sarah's chair. "Ma'am, I need to examine your wound." Sarah looked up at him with eyes that seemed glassy with fever. "I don't understand, Marshal. What does my injury have to do with anything? We're looking for 3 women who robbed a bank in Denver. One of them was shot during the escape. A bullet wound to the side." "A bullet wound?" Sarah's voice was perfectly pitched with surprise and fear. "Marshal, I assure you I've never robbed a bank in my life. I'm a schoolteacher from Colorado Springs." Foster studied her face carefully. "Then you won't mind if I examine the wound?" I suppose not, if you insist." What happened next was something I'll never forget. Sarah began to unbutton her dress, revealing the bandages I'd applied. But as Foster leaned closer to look, she suddenly swayed and collapsed back into the chair. "Oh my," she whispered. "I'm sorry, Marshal. I feel quite faint." Foster caught her arm to steady her, and in that moment of contact, I saw something change in his expression. The hard suspicion softened into concern. "Ma'am, are you all right?" "I'm just very tired," Sarah replied weakly. "The fever comes and goes." Foster looked at the bandages, then at Sarah's pale face, then at me. "Mr. Whitmore, have you been caring for this woman since the storm?" "Yes, sir. She's my cousin, my late wife's family." "And these ladies?" "Neighbors," Kate said. "We heard Sarah was ill and came to help." For a long moment, Foster stood silent, studying all of us. I could practically hear him weighing the evidence, looking for inconsistencies in our story. "Ma'am," he said finally to Sarah, "I apologize for disturbing you. You clearly need rest." "Thank you, Marshal." Foster walked to the window and looked out at his men, then back at us. "Mr. Whitmore, I want you to know that harboring criminals is a federal offense. The penalty is 5 years in prison. I understand, Marshal, but I'm not harboring any criminals. I'm caring for my sick cousin." "I hope that's true." Foster moved toward the door, then stopped. "One more thing. The women we're looking for had 3 horses. Good horses, well cared for. If someone were hiding them, where would be the best place around here?" I thought carefully before answering. "There are several box canyons in the high country. Good grass, protected from the wind. That's where I'd put horses if I wanted to hide them." "Show me." My blood ran cold. If I took him to the canyon where I'd hidden their horses, we'd all be finished. But if I refused, he'd know I was lying. "I'd be happy to, Marshal. But in this weather it would be dangerous. The trails are icy, and there's another storm coming." Foster looked outside again, noting the threatening sky. "Tomorrow, then. First thing in the morning." "Of course." After the lawman left, we sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Finally, Kate spoke. "That was too close." "He didn't believe us," Becky said. "I could see it in his eyes." "Maybe not completely," I agreed, "but he couldn't prove anything either. Sarah, you were magnificent. That performance with the fainting spell gave us just enough doubt to work with." Sarah smiled weakly. "I wasn't entirely performing. I really did feel faint." "What do we do now?" Kate asked. "He wants you to show him the canyons tomorrow." "We'll have to move the horses tonight." Take them higher up, where the snow is too deep for pursuit. And then we pray that this storm hits hard and keeps everyone inside for a few days. As if in answer to my words, the first snowflakes began to fall. Within an hour, it was coming down hard, and by evening we were in the middle of a full blizzard. "Looks like we got our prayer answered," Becky said, watching the snow pile up against the windows. "For now," I replied, "but this can't last forever. Sooner or later we'll have to make a decision about what comes next." That night, as the storm raged outside, we huddled around the fire and talked about the future. Kate and Becky were determined to leave as soon as Sarah was strong enough to travel. Sarah insisted she was ready now, despite my medical concerns. "Where will you go?" I asked. "West," Kate said. "California, maybe. Or Oregon. Somewhere far from here, where we can start over. That's a long, dangerous journey, especially in winter." "Staying here is dangerous too," Kate replied. "For all of us." I knew she was right, but the thought of them leaving filled me with a sadness I hadn't expected. In just 3 days, these women had brought my cabin to life, had made me feel useful and needed and part of something larger than my own grief. "There's another option," I said quietly. "What?" "You could stay. All of you. Permanently." Kate stared at me. "Thomas, that's impossible. We're wanted by the law." "The law is looking for 3 bank robbers, but Sarah here is my cousin from Colorado. Kate and Becky are neighbors who decided to stay and help care for her through the winter. Come spring, maybe Sarah decides she likes it here and settles down. Maybe Kate and Becky decide to homestead in the valley. You'd do that? Give up your solitude for 3 women you barely know?" I looked at each of them, Sarah with her quiet strength, Becky with her gentle courage, Kate with her fierce loyalty, and realized that I'd already made my decision. "I gave up my solitude the moment I let you in," I said. "These past 3 days have been the best I've had in 10 years. I don't want to go back to being alone. But the risk, life is risk. I spent 10 years trying to avoid it, and all I accomplished was half living. I'd rather face danger with people I care about than face safety alone." Kate was quiet for a long moment. "What about the horses? The evidence?" "We'll deal with that tomorrow, move them deeper into the mountains, maybe turn them loose to run wild. Without the horses, there's no proof of anything, and if Marshal Foster doesn't believe our story, then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it." As the storm continued through the night, we made our plans. In the morning, weather permitting, Kate and I would move the horses to a remote canyon where they'd be safe from discovery. Becky would stay with Sarah, continuing to play the role of the caring neighbor. "Are you sure about this?" Kate asked as we banked the fire for the night. "More sure than I've been about anything in 10 years, I replied. "Why? Why are you willing to risk everything for us?" I thought about the question, about Ellen and Lucy, about the 10 years I'd spent waiting to die. "Because you gave me back my life. Because for the first time since I lost my family, I have a reason to wake up in the morning. Because sometimes the people we need find us when we least expect it." Kate smiled, the first truly relaxed smile I'd seen from her. "Then I guess we're staying." As I lay down to sleep, listening to the storm and the quiet breathing of 3 women who'd become my family, I realized that my story of loss and isolation was ending. A new story was beginning, one of second chances, unexpected love, and the courage to start over. The law might come for us again, and the future was far from certain. But for the first time in 10 years, I had hope. And sometimes hope is all a man needs to keep going. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside our cabin we were warm and safe and together. And that, I thought as I drifted off to sleep, was enough. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey of redemption and second chances. If you loved this story of a lonely man who found family in the most unexpected way, let us know in the comments which moment touched your heart the most. Don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling Old West adventures that will keep you on the edge of your seat.